There are parts of the world that have been deserts for centuries. To them, heat and dust are nothing new, but what is just how quickly things are changing. Coming up, we check in with nations across Central and South Asia to see how their landscapes are shifting as dry spells increase in frequency and length. We haven't seen any of the drought in Turkmenistan. Can you describe what it's been like?
The last significant rain was in sometime in May. This is something that the government of Turkmenistan is taking very seriously.
Just 2 degrees is on now.
Levels of water, underground water, are falling drastically.
Is this just the way people have to live from now on? This was a pretty cool night in Suleimania, Iraq in mid-November. Rain and chunks of ice built up on certain roads, causing havoc to traffic. But this isn't a story about flooding, the opposite really. These brief showers came after months of very dry weather. Iraq on the whole has been experiencing below average precipitation in recent years, which has meant reduced water levels and dry spells across several provinces. Well, drought conditions really. When people hear the word drought, most imagine one thing: no rain. But it's a bit more complicated than that. A drought happens when an area doesn't get the water it needs over a long period of time. That can mean a lack of rainfall, but it can also mean reduced snowmelt, river flow and groundwater, or even soil losing the moisture crops need to grow. A famous example of this happened in the Sahel region of Africa in the 1970s and 80s. A long-term drought devastated countries like Mali, Niger and Chad, killed crops and triggered one of the worst famines of the 20th century. Another is Australia's millennium drought between 1997 and 2009. Over 12 years, the country's $50 billion agricultural sector all but collapsed and forced water rationing and major policy changes. Scientists break down drought into 4 main types. There's meteorological drought, when there's simply not enough rain. A hydrological drought happens when rivers and reservoirs start shrinking. When soil dries out so much that crops fail, that's indicative of agricultural drought. And then there's socioeconomic drought, when water scarcity begins affecting people and entire communities. What's making modern droughts more dangerous is heat. As the planet warms, heat waves dry out land faster and make every drought more intense. Experts call this atmospheric thirst. The hotter the air, the more moisture it pulls from the ground. And when drought hits, it sends shock waves everywhere. Crops fail, hydropower slows, drinking water gets rationed, wildfires spread more easily, and sometimes families are forced to move. Countries like Iran, Somalia, Mexico and the western United States face rising tensions over who gets the little water that's left. The Colorado River, for example, which supports 40 million people, has been drying up after more than 2 decades of drought. States like Arizona, California and Nevada have been deadlocked over how much water each one gets. And with current river management rules set to expire, they're under pressure to reach an agreement or risk even deeper cuts ahead. So a drought is a lot more than the absence of rain. It's the absence of water, the rivers and soil we rely on, and the systems we've built our lives around. We mentioned Iran in there for a reason. The country's been facing one of the worst water crises in its modern history. What used to be a slow, long-term problem suddenly became something millions of people face every day. And that's because Iran's lakes have been drying up. And so dramatically, you can see it from space. We'll speak with the country's former environment minister in a minute. But first, here's why Iran has been running out of water and time. At the Saleh Shrine in Iran's capital, residents extend their hands to the heavens.
از خدا درخواست می‌کنیم که لطف و رحمتشون رو به ما ارزانی کنن و اینکه بتونیم از این شرایط سخت عبور کنیم.
Iran's water crisis isn't new, but it is getting worse. From farmers in the west watching their crops fail to families in the south turning on taps that barely run. Iran's water shortages have been shaping everything from daily routines to political tensions.
It first started with cutting water from the environment, most silenced or voiceless sector, then farmers, then industrial areas, and now the urban areas. We have never seen such a thing in Tehran, my lovely homeland where I was born. We never had a situation like this.
A big part of the story is geography. Iran is naturally dry, and about 2/3 of the country is desert, and it relies on seasonal rains and melting snow from its mountains, including Mount Damavand and the Alam Kur. But those rains are becoming less predictable, and the snowpack that used to feed Iran's rivers just isn't lasting as long. The climate crisis has turned what used to be a manageable challenge into a nationwide emergency.
حتی ممکنه که مجبور باشیم بعضی از شبها که مردم عزیزمون در واقع آرامش هستن تو اون شبها که کمتر آب مصرف میکنن در واقع فشار آب را تا حد صفر پایین بیاریم و این خب کمک میکنه به اینکه در واقع ما هدر رفت آب نداشته باشیم، اما ممکنه برای مردم عزیزمون زحمت ایجاد بکنه. من تقاضا میکنم که نسبت به نصب ذخیره ساز حتما اقدام بکنن.
But climate is only part of the problem. Decades of overuse has caught up with Iran. For years, water was pumped out and diverted faster than nature could replace it. And deep wells kept being dug lower and lower, which is why some regions are literally shrinking as the ground collapses beneath them. The most dramatic example is Lake Urmia. Once the Middle East's largest lake, it shrunk by more than 90% in just a few decades. What used to be a vast body of water is now salt flats, stretching to the horizon. And all of this is fueling anger. In recent years, protests have broken out in cities like Isfahan and Khuzestan, where residents marched to demand something most of us take for granted.
The issue of mismanagement is real. A problem like this was not created overnight. It's the product of decades of mismanagement, lack of foresight, and problems in planning in not only the water sector, but the other sectors that the water sector is interconnected with.
Experts argue that without major changes to how water is managed, parts of Iran could face long-term scarcity that reshapes the country's economy and where people can live. Describe the current water situation, not only in major cities, but also vulnerable communities.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This is an important question because we're dealing with a global and a regional issue. There was a recent report, I think just a couple weeks ago, on the issue of water scarcity in the world and the fact that in the past 30 years, I think it was called continental drought. And in this report, there was a large research groups from different countries working on this issue. And they had come to the conclusion that in the past, I think 3 decades, the world has lost about 40% of its fresh water. And the issue was that this is an ongoing trend and that climate change is aggravating this condition, and that some regions, like particularly Western Asia, are more prone to water scarcity. And this is exactly the case that we have not only in Iran, but in many countries of the region. We're facing this same challenge. However, in Iran, as you mentioned, the issue of potable water or drinking water in our large cities, because we have now about 65% of the Iranian population are living in cities, and some of them are mega cities like Tehran, with over 9 million population during the night and more than 12 to 14 million during the day. So this is a mega city, and we're dealing with a lot of challenges in terms of being able to bring potable water available for the population. So the first strategy was to encourage water consumption, changes in patterns of water consumption and saving water, and also decreasing the pressure of water in our water pipes. And to some extent, this has been successful. But to get the picture correct about what's happening, this year we've had about 40% less rainfall in Iran as compared to the previous year up to now. And we just practically hadn't had any rain until a couple days ago. That means that we had about 210, 220 days of no rainfall. And so that makes the situation very difficult.
But Ms. Ebtekar, do you have water? Does everyone you know have water? How much water does Tehran have compared to communities outside the capital?
Well, it's different because there are large suburban areas around Tehran now, and they have been facing water shortages and water cuts on certain hours. There are no long-term water cuts, but there are, for example, overnight water is sometimes shut down in some areas. And for that reason, many people and even the government has encouraged the people to go after these water tanks so that when the water is shut down, they can use water from the tank. But it hasn't created any havoc, any panic, because this is something which has happened gradually, and the people understand because they see that there's no rainfall, and it's very evident.
But there were protests about the water situation in places like in Isfahan. You earlier said Iran is in a dry region, we understand. So I wonder if there's anything the government and their policies can actually do to improve the situation.
It's the people, it's the way that people have lived before, traditionally in Iran. But unfortunately, this unsustainable pattern of development has resulted in more water consumption, particularly in the agricultural sector. We have the most water consumption in the agriculture. It's about 90% goes to the agriculture, 6 or 7% goes to the cities, 5 or 6% goes to the industries. So the agricultural sector has to make the most modifications in their and changes in their irrigation patterns, in their crop production patterns, and the government has been providing loans for the agricultural sector, and we are now seeing more and more greenhouses, more and more hydroponic systems, but it's a very large issue. This is a very vast country, and a lot of the agriculture depends both on rainfall but also on underground water. We have dwindling underground water resources now, and the levels of underground water are falling drastically in many areas, and this is creating a lot of challenges.
So the president has talked about, he's talked about moving the Iranian capital. Is that plan going forward?
This is an idea that comes up here and there once in a while, and it's just come up as an idea. It's a possible.
So it won't happen?
No, there's no decision. There's no decisive decision or move on this issue, and it's very difficult because, as I mentioned, this is a 9 million city at least, and considering the suburbs, the province is about 15 to 17 million people in this Tehran province. So it's a very difficult issue.
Yeah, particularly costly considering Iran's been under international sanctions for years.
The sanctions have had a detrimental effect on our water resources because our policy has been relying on, we have been trying to decrease dependency on foreign trade in terms of our agriculture. And so that has put more pressure on our water resources, more pressure on our agricultural sector. And that is an issue which is now being debated a lot, that we cannot go along with this policy of independence in terms of our agricultural, particularly the strategic needs like wheat because that's the staple food, and rice. And these are water-consuming products. And these are creating a lot of challenges for our underground water resources. So yes, the sanctions have had a detrimental effect, and they are creating serious challenges for the farmers, for the agricultural sector, and for food security in general.
People in Uzbekistan, the country with the largest population in Central Asia, have also been praying for relief from drought. This particular drought is reportedly the harshest for residents in 170 years. Over the last 6 or so decades, temperatures in Uzbekistan have risen nearly 3 times the global average. Uzbek authorities say they've used rain-making technology, but it's expensive and far from being widely implemented.
Yağmurlarını tilab, istiqol namazlarını ado etdik. Allah'ımdan bizge, yurtimizga, diyorimizga fayz baraka berishni, ko'p yomg'ir berib, qut baraka berishni Allohdan so'rab qolamiz.
So droughts are seriously threatening the region, particularly because of an increase in frequency and length. A 2024 analysis also found that drought generally has a negative impact on migratory birds, especially those that depend on predictable rest stops like lakes, wetlands, and oases. Droughts are draining these stopovers from China's Dongting Lake to European wetlands and US flyways. And research shows that when birds lose water and food in places they spend the winter, many don't survive the journey back in spring. And as rivers and wetlands dry, birds change routes, arrive in worse condition, or don't turn up at all. So Turkmenistan also knows all too well how drought impacts both us and wildlife. We called up Tanya Rosen. She's coordinator at the Convention of Migratory Species. We haven't seen anything of the drought in Turkmenistan. Can you describe what it's been like?
Turkmenistan is one of the driest countries in Central Asia, and it's one that, according to studies, is bound to be one of the most affected by climate change. And you can see it, especially this year. We have not had a lot of precipitation. In fact, sort of the last rain was in the lowland. The last significant rain was in sometime in May of this year, and just now, basically in December, we're seeing a little bit more precipitation, and this, of course, has been affecting the quality of pastures and significantly impacting people that rely on pastures for grazing their livestock, especially the sheep and the goats and the cattle, and obviously it's going to affect people even more in the future if this trend continues. Obviously, pushing the question as to what is the current capacity, current carrying capacity of the land in the face of climate change, and so I believe that more and more we'll see all these big questions about how what can be done to meet and support the needs of local people in the face of these conditions. Obviously, this is something that the government of Turkmenistan is taking very seriously, and they've been participating in climate change negotiations, and also pushing for the creation of a climate technology center to see how technology can support the use of measures that can help mitigate the impacts of climate change and support people in the countries that are going to be increasingly affected.
How are people coping, though, and how is the government helping?
People have access to water because even in places where the natural sources are no longer available, as I mentioned, because it's something that the country takes very seriously. Water is being trucked to especially to remote herding communities, so that both the people and the animals can have the water. But obviously, this is not a very sustainable solution, because eventually, these water sources are bound to diminish. What is troubling is that there's a lot of natural water sources in the mountains that are drying out. which obviously creates these conditions for increased, conflict between, pastoralists that rely on water for their livestock and the wildlife that deeply relies on water for their survival.
So you do a lot of work researching migratory species. The Times of Central Asia is reporting that rain there was normal only in February and March this year. How is this affecting the animals that move from region to region to survive?
The wildlife is deeply affected because all of the water is the key water sources are in the mountains, which constitute a small percentage of the entire country. This is where you find, the core sort of zones for the Persian leopard and its prey, the Ural sheep and the Bezor goat, and so all of these animals gravitate during the hot months, gravitate around these very limited water sources. Hunters, poachers know, where to go and look for the animals. And so they usually go to these water points where the animals are the most vulnerable and kill them. And obviously, we see how drought and climate change is exacerbating some of the existing threats that are facing these animals.
Is there a strategy to deal with these worsening drought conditions for the long term?
There is almost 3,000 square kilometers of habitat that's critical for Persian leopards and the prey in the northwest of Turkmenistan that it's bound to be set aside as protected at any moment. All of the documents have been prepared, and it's now just up to the president to sign these protected areas into law. And this will be a critical step to obviously protecting the wildlife, but it will also trigger a series of measures to support the local communities that live around these future protected areas, as well as how the local communities can benefit from some agroforestry projects in the buffer zone of these protected areas that can bring local products in the forms of barberry jams and barberry products that can be marketed not only nationally but also internationally.
Tanya, I love your leopard shirt. Why do you like the species so much?
Leopards are like my spirit animal, and I think that they are, they make the landscape alive. And there's a lot of misconceptions about leopards, being these very dangerous animals. But actually, when you see them in the wild, the last thing they want is a confrontation with people. They avoid conflict all the time unless they feel like they're being attacked, or if it's a mother with cubs, if they feel like the cubs are under threat. And so what we're trying to do in with our team in Turkmenistan is promote this view of what leopards are and what they do to an ecosystem. Because by protecting the Persian leopard, you end up taking a number of measures that benefit a lot of other wildlife, benefit the habitat, and ultimately benefit the people that live in those areas.
So you just heard how drought and water stress have been affecting people's lives in countries like Iran and Uzbekistan. But sometimes when rivers dry up and animals die, there's one creature that's built to thrive. It's time for Just to Matter, where we highlight the things some of us take for granted, but that have a huge impact on our planet. Today, vultures. Vultures. They're what scientists call obligate scavengers. Their entire survival depends on finding and consuming dead animals. Their stomachs are so acidic, they can neutralize harmful bacteria and toxins that would make most animals and us seriously ill, meaning they get rid of carcasses before they can spread disease. By eating and processing the dead, vultures return nutrients to the soil and help keep ecosystems in balance. When these birds are around, dead matter doesn't get a chance to rot and pollute water or poison the environment. Healthy vulture populations often signal a functioning, well-balanced ecosystem. But where vultures have collapsed, like in parts of Asia and Africa, the impact is immediate. Carcasses pile up, and disease and rabies cases rise. In a 2025 study, Stanford University researchers found that when vultures were poisoned or killed by humans, disease-carrying mesopredators like dogs and rats exploded in number. In South Asia, for example, vulture populations dropped by over 99% within decades. The collapse was linked to a wave of rabies outbreaks and unmanaged carcass dumping. So the next time you hear vultures described as ugly or ominous, remember this: these birds are basically nature's cleanup crew. And in a warming, drying world where droughts may become the norm, we might just need vultures more than ever. And that's our show. So vultures help keep our ecosystems in balance. And across Iraq, Iran, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, the drought doesn't look completely the same, but the impact feels familiar. And people are trying to adapt as best as they can.